Christopher Nolan's newly released film, The Odyssey, has brought Homer's ancient epic back to the big screen. Its gods and monsters may belong to myth, but the fears behind them were painfully real. Losing home, losing control, watching a crew collapse, or disappearing beneath the sea. So what are the 10 greatest monsters in the Odyssey, and what human fears were hiding behind them? Number 10. The Lotus Eaters. Odysseus and his men have already been driven far from their intended route when they reach an unfamiliar coast. They are exhausted, disoriented, and dependent on whatever food or water the land might provide. Odysseus sends several men inland to discover who lives there. The people they meet show no obvious hostility. They raise no weapons and make no attempt to imprison the strangers. Instead, they offer them something to eat. The men accept the lotus. Then, their reason for continuing disappears. They no longer want to report back to the ship. They no longer care about Ithaca, their families, or the long journey still ahead. They want only to remain where they are and continue eating. Nothing has been taken from them by force. That is what makes the episode disturbing. The men are conscious. They are not crying for help. From their altered point of view, there is no emergency. The difficult voyage has been replaced by effortless contentment. Odysseus sees the danger differently. He drags them back to the ships while they resist. He has them restrained beneath the rowing benches, then orders the rest of the crew to leave before anyone else can taste the lotus. The threat is defeated, but not through persuasion. Odysseus cannot remind the affected men why home matters, because the emotional connection to home is precisely what the lotus has removed. He can only act on behalf of the people they were before they ate it. For an ancient audience, the episode did not need a magical plant to feel believable. A long voyage depended on more than wind and navigation. It depended on the continued cooperation of the crew. Sailors who had endured hunger, storms, and rigid command might reach a peaceful shore and decide that the official destination was no longer worth the suffering required to reach it. Desertion could end a mission without damaging a single ship. The lotus turns that danger into something visible. Eat this, and the reason for continuing disappears. Many attempts have been made to identify the lotus with a real plant. Different candidates have been proposed, including species that might produce sedative or intoxicating effects. But the poem does not give enough evidence to establish one botanical answer. The deeper meaning does not depend on chemistry. The sailors do not become violent or irrational. They become satisfied with abandoning everything that once defined them. Homecoming requires more than remembering the name of a distant island. It requires the belief that something waiting beyond the horizon is worth hardship in the present. The lotus destroys that belief. This is why the Lotus Eaters begin the ranking. No one is killed. No ship is destroyed. Odysseus remains unaffected, and the victims can still be physically removed. But the episode introduces the first great fear of the journey. A traveler does not always fail because the road becomes impossible. Sometimes he fails because he no longer wants to reach the destination. Later in the story, Odysseus himself will be held on an island where forgetting home is not necessary. He will remember Ithaca every day. He simply will not be free to leave. Number 9. Calypso. Odysseus sits beside the sea and cries. Behind him lies an island of extraordinary beauty. Trees surround a sheltered cave. Water flows through green woodland. Birds move through the branches, and everything appears untouched by war, hunger, or age. There is food. There is safety. There is a goddess who wants him to remain. To anyone arriving without context, Ogygia might look like the place where every hardship ends. For Odysseus, it has become a prison. Calypso has kept him there for years. She possesses divine power, while he has no crew and no functioning ship. Whatever affection exists between them cannot remove that imbalance. Odysseus spends his days looking across the water toward a home he cannot see. His body is protected. His life has stopped moving. Calypso offers him more than comfort. She offers an escape from the fear behind every mortal ambition. If Odysseus stays, he need not grow old. He need not lose his strength or watch his position disappear. He may avoid the fate waiting for every ordinary human being. Penelope cannot promise him that. She is mortal. She has aged during his absence. Ithaca is less beautiful than a divine island. Home contains responsibility, conflict, and the certainty of death. Odysseus chooses it anyway. His decision reveals that immortality and life are not necessarily the same thing. A human identity is built from relationships, obligations, and memories shared with other people. Odysseus is not merely a body that wishes to continue existing. He is Penelope's husband, Telemachus's father, and the absent king of Ithaca. An eternal life on Ogygia might preserve his body while slowly making those identities meaningless. Calypso is not a simple monster. She objects to the unequal rules applied to divine relationships. Male gods repeatedly take mortal women, yet goddesses who form relationships with mortal men are condemned. Her complaint exposes a tension within the mythology itself. But her grievance does not make Odysseus free. Affection is not the same as consent. Protection is not the same as belonging. And a beautiful place does not become home merely because leaving it would be dangerous. This is the fear Calypso represents. Captivity can be disguised as rescue. Unlike the lotus, Ogygia does not erase Odysseus's memory. It forces him to live with complete memory and no power to act upon it. Every day he remembers Penelope. Every day he sees the sea. Every day the distance remains unchanged. Only after the gods intervene is Calypso ordered to release him. Even then, freedom does not arrive as a finished ship waiting on the shore. Odysseus must build the means of escape himself. He cuts timber, constructs a raft, and prepares to return to the same sea that has already cost him so much. He chooses danger, mortality, and uncertainty over perfect isolation. That is why Calypso ranks above the Lotus Eaters. The Lotus briefly threatens a few members of the crew. Calypso holds Odysseus himself for years and offers to replace his human life permanently. Yet she does not take away his human form. Odysseus can still stand on the shore and recognize who he is. Another host will offer food and shelter to his companions. When they accept, they will remain conscious of their identities. But their bodies will no longer be human. Number 8. Circe. A group of sailors approaches a house hidden in an unfamiliar landscape. Wolves and lions move around the building, but they do not attack. They behave with an unnatural calm, almost as though human awareness has been trapped behind animal eyes. From inside comes the sound of a woman singing. The men call out. Circe opens the door and invites them in. Once again, danger arrives through hospitality. She places food and drink before the strangers. Mixed into the meal is a drug that weakens their connection to home. Then she touches them with her wand. Their bodies change. The sailors become pigs. The transformation is made more disturbing by one detail. Their heads, voices, and physical forms become those of animals, but their minds remain human. They know what they were. They understand what has happened. They can no longer make their bodies communicate that knowledge. This is not the peaceful surrender produced by the lotus. It is awareness without control. Circe drives the transformed men into a pen and feeds them as livestock. Members of an organized seafaring expedition are reduced to creatures owned and managed by another intelligence. Later interpreters often treated the episode as an allegory. Some understood the pigs as an expression of uncontrolled appetite. Others connected the transformation to pleasure, sexuality, or the animal impulses hidden beneath civilized behavior. Those readings are possible, but the poem does not establish one fixed explanation. The clearest horror is simpler. The sailors retain human minds while losing the bodies through which human identity is recognized. They cannot speak. They cannot negotiate. They cannot resist. They cannot tell anyone what has been done to them. One man avoids the initial trap and brings the warning back to Odysseus. This time, survival depends on outside help. The god Hermes meets Odysseus and gives him a protective herb. With that knowledge, Odysseus can drink Circe's mixture without being transformed. The expected sequence fails. Circe strikes him with her wand, but he remains human. When he draws his sword, the balance of power shifts, and she agrees to restore the others. The sailors recover their original bodies. At first, the danger appears to be over. A magical threat has been understood, resisted, and reversed. Then something less dramatic happens. Odysseus and his men stay. They eat, drink, and recover. Circe changes from enemy to advisor, eventually giving Odysseus information he will need for the journey ahead. But an entire year passes. The crew finally has to remind its commander that they still have a home. That delay complicates the victory. No drug is controlling Odysseus now. No wand holds him inside the house. He remains because relief has made departure easy to postpone. After prolonged danger, delay can feel like healing. A traveler tells himself that he will leave after one more meal, one more night, or one more season. Nothing has to imprison him when exhaustion makes freedom difficult to use. Circe, therefore, embodies two related fears. The first is forced dehumanization, being trapped inside a body that no longer belongs to one's identity. The second is voluntary stagnation, recovering freedom but failing to act upon it. This places her above Calypso. Calypso holds one man. Circe transforms an entire group and exposes how fragile human status becomes when speech and bodily control are removed. Still, Circe's magic can be countered, her victims can be restored, she can be persuaded to help. The next disaster requires no spell. No one will be transformed into an animal. Hunger will make human beings cross the boundary by themselves. Number 7. The Cattle of Helios. The warning is explicit. On the island of Thrinacia live the sacred cattle of Helios, the god who sees the world from above. Odysseus is told that the animals must not be harmed. If the crew leaves them untouched, a path home may remain. If the men kill them, destruction will follow. Odysseus passes the warning to his companions. They understand the rule. There is no hidden condition and no unfamiliar language to interpret. Then the weather traps them on the island. The crew consumes the provisions stored aboard the ship. Fishing and foraging provide less and less. Days pass, supplies disappear, and the sacred animals remain visible. The cattle are healthy. The sailors are starving. That contrast turns an apparently simple command into a severe test. The men do not violate the prohibition immediately. Discipline erodes gradually as hunger narrows their attention. A future punishment begins to feel distant beside the physical pain of the present. At the critical moment, Odysseus is absent. He has withdrawn to pray, and sleep overcomes him. The crew must decide without him. Eurylochus speaks. His argument is not meaningless. Of all deaths, he suggests, starvation is among the worst. Better to eat, recover strength, and face whatever punishment may come than to remain obedient while their bodies slowly destroy themselves. The men even attempt to place the act inside a moral structure. They promise that if they reach home, they will build a temple and repay Helios with offerings. But they already know that the animals cannot be replaced through promises. They kill the cattle. For a few days, the immediate crisis is solved. Food is available, hunger retreats. Then the signs begin. The hides seem to move, the meat appears to make sounds. What the men have done cannot be turned into an ordinary meal merely because desperation gave them a reason. When the weather finally allows the ship to leave, the consequence arrives at sea. The vessel is destroyed. The remaining companions disappear into the water. Odysseus alone survives. The cattle never attack anyone. They are peaceful animals requiring no heroic battle. The monstrous force lies in the situation surrounding them. A group is trapped between an absolute prohibition and an immediate biological need. This raises a difficult question. How much of morality depends on conditions that make morality possible? Rules feel permanent when food is available, authority is present, and tomorrow remains believable. Extreme deprivation changes the scale of every choice. That does not make the crew innocent. The poem directly connects their decision with their destruction, but it allows us to see how people move toward an act they already know is forbidden. The episode is also about the limits of leadership. Odysseus has correct information. He communicates the warning. Yet knowledge does not guarantee obedience, and authority cannot be maintained through words alone. The moment he is absent, another voice reorganizes the group. The cattle of Helios represent the fear that hunger will break law, discipline, and collective trust. They rank above Circe because the damage cannot be reversed. No herb or agreement returns the dead sailors to the deck. Yet the catastrophe remains avoidable in principle. Had the crew resisted, the predicted destruction might not have occurred. The next fleet receives almost no such opportunity. It reaches a harbor that seems protected from the sea. The ships enter in search of safety. Then the geography closes around them. Number 6. The Laestrygonians. The harbor looks almost perfect. High cliffs surround calm water. A narrow entrance protects the interior from the open sea. After days of exposure to wind and waves, the enclosed bay promises rest and shelter. Most of the ships move inside. Odysseus makes a different choice. He keeps his own vessel nearer the outer edge, where open water remains accessible. At first, the distinction appears unimportant. Then scouts go ashore. They encounter a settlement belonging to the Laestrygonians, a people described as enormous. The contact turns violent almost immediately. One of the visitors is seized, while the others run back toward the fleet. By then, the harbor has already become a trap. The inhabitants gather along the cliffs above the ships and throw massive stones onto the vessels below. The trapped crews cannot maneuver effectively. Hulls break, masts collapse. Ships collide as men attempt to reach the same narrow exit. Every feature that made the harbor appear safe now serves the attackers. Protection from waves means enclosure. High cliffs mean elevated ground. A narrow entrance means controlled escape. The Laestrygonians capture sailors and carry them away, like fish pulled from the water. Only Odysseus' ship remains beyond the deepest part of the killing zone. He does not organize a rescue. There is no time. He cuts the cable and orders his men to row. One ship escapes. The fleet is gone. The story contains giants and cannibalistic violence, but its physical logic would have been recognizable to real sailors. A ship traveling beyond familiar territory needed to approach unknown coasts. Crews required water, food, repairs, and information. Every landing, therefore, involved trust. A settlement might welcome strangers. It might trade with them. It might also rob, enslave, or kill them once their ships were vulnerable. A protected cove could conceal attackers as easily as it concealed vessels from bad weather. Different modern locations have been proposed as inspirations for the Laestrygonian harbor. Some real bays resemble the enclosed geography described in the poem. But resemblance is not proof. The importance of the episode does not depend on finding one exact harbor. Its power comes from reversing the meaning of refuge. The ships are not destroyed despite entering a safe anchorage. They are destroyed because they entered it. The social scale of the attack matters as well. This is not one isolated monster. An entire community participates. No reasonable authority appears to restrain the violence. The strangers have entered a world in which visitors are treated not as guests, but as prey. For a maritime culture, danger did not end when land came into view. A crew could survive the sea and still be destroyed by the people waiting on the shore. The Laestrygonians rank above the cattle of Helios because the devastation is immediate and nearly total. Most of Odysseus's ships disappear in a single coordinated attack. Yet caution still creates a path out. Because his vessel is positioned near open water, Odysseus can escape. The next danger requires no enclosed harbor and no falling stones. It does not force sailors toward death. It allows them to hear exactly what they have always wanted. Number 5. The Sirens. Before Odysseus reaches their shore, he already knows what the Sirens do. Circe warns him that sailors who hear their song do not continue home. Around the singers lie the remains of those who came too close. The warning gives him time to prepare. He softens wax and seals the ears of his crew. They will continue rowing without hearing the voices ahead. Odysseus chooses something different for himself. He wants to listen. He orders the men to bind him upright against the mast. If he commands them to release him, they must refuse. If he begs or threatens them, they must tighten the ropes. It is one of the most revealing decisions he makes. Odysseus creates a system designed to protect the crew from Odysseus. He understands that the man giving instructions before the song and the man hearing it may not want the same thing. The ship approaches. The sirens begin to sing. Modern art often depicts them as beautiful mermaids whose main weapon is sexual attraction. The song in the Odyssey offers something more precise. The sirens know Odysseus. They address him as the famous Greek whose role at Troy has already entered heroic memory. They promise knowledge of the war and of events across the world. Their temptation is not random pleasure. It is understanding. Come closer and hear the complete story. For Odysseus, the offer reaches directly into his identity. He is a man defined by intelligence, curiosity, and reputation. He wants to know more, and he wants to hear his own importance, confirmed by voices that seem to understand everything. The sirens turn those strengths against him. Once the song reaches him, the warning is no longer enough. Odysseus signals to be released. The commander who designed the restraint now demands that it be removed. His sailors cannot hear his explanation. That is what saves them. They follow the earlier order and pull the ropes tighter. The ship moves beyond the effective range of the song. Only then is Odysseus freed. He survives, but not because his will proves stronger than the sirens. His will fails exactly as predicted. He survives because he accepted in advance that knowledge of a danger would not make him immune to it. This is the fear hidden inside the encounter. Desire can overpower informed intention. A person may understand the consequences, create a careful plan, and sincerely intend to follow it. Then the desired object appears, and the present self attempts to destroy every protection created by the past self. The sirens also tempt Odysseus through memory. Their song leads him back toward Troy, where he was a celebrated warrior among celebrated men. Homecoming will return him to a more ordinary human scale, husband, father, ruler of a small island, and a man who will eventually grow old. The sirens offer endless attention to the heroic past. But anyone who remains to hear the entire song loses the future. Their victims do not emerge with greater wisdom. They stop moving. The danger is not knowledge itself. It is knowledge separated from life and action. It is the desire to remain forever inside the story of who one has already been. The sirens rank above the Laestrygonians because physical force is unnecessary. They enter the mind and persuade the victim to participate in his own destruction. Their power is intimate. Still, it can be managed. Wax blocks the sound, rope blocks action. Cooperation carries Odysseus beyond the shore. A controlled system compensates for a vulnerable mind. But systems work only where rules still have meaning. Earlier in his travels, Odysseus enters a cave expecting the customs that protect strangers. Inside, he meets a host who recognizes no authority above his own strength. Number 4. Polyphemus the Cyclops. The cave is filled with food. There are cheeses, containers of milk, and pens for animals. For hungry sailors arriving on an unfamiliar coast, the supplies are valuable. Odysseus's men want to take what they can and leave. Odysseus decides to wait. He wants to meet the owner. He expects the stranger's welcome traditionally owed by a host, perhaps followed by the gift that often confirms such a relationship. This expectation rests on the Greek practice known as xenia. Hospitality was not simply personal generosity. In a world where travelers moved beyond the protection of their own families and communities, the relationship between host and guest created temporary security. A peaceful stranger could expect food, shelter, and protection before being questioned too aggressively. The guest, in return, was expected to respect the household. The practice was connected with divine order. Without it, travel between communities became far more dangerous. Odysseus enters the cave expecting that order to protect him. Then Polyphemus returns. The Cyclops is enormous. He rolls a stone across the entrance that none of the trapped men can move. But his size is not the most important difference between them. The Cyclopes are described as living without shared assemblies or established laws. Each household exists under the authority of its own master. Inside the cave, Polyphemus possesses absolute power. Odysseus appeals to the customs governing hospitality. He invokes the gods who protect strangers. Polyphemus rejects the appeal. There is no local court to punish him. No council will intervene. The entrance is sealed, and strength determines what happens next. Hospitality is reversed. The host does not feed the guests. He eats them. Polyphemus seizes members of the crew and kills them with a violence that reduces experienced warriors to helpless bodies. Odysseus cannot simply murder the Cyclops while he sleeps. If Polyphemus dies before moving the stone, the survivors may remain sealed inside until they starve. The problem requires more than revenge. Odysseus must disable the giant while preserving his ability to open the cave. He must also prevent any nearby Cyclopes from understanding that an attack is taking place. He begins with wine. Polyphemus drinks a powerful mixture brought from the ship. As his judgment weakens, he asks Odysseus for his name. The answer is a weapon made from language. Nobody. When the Cyclops collapses, Odysseus and his men drive a heated wooden stake into his eye. Polyphemus cries out. The neighboring Cyclopes ask who is harming him. His answer defeats his own request for help. Nobody is attacking me. The others conclude that no external enemy is present and leave him alone. Yet the entrance remains blocked. To complete the escape, Odysseus uses the Cyclops' own animals. Polyphemus must release his sheep to graze. Unable to see, he checks them by touch as they pass. The men hide beneath the animals. The Cyclops feels the backs of the sheep but fails to detect the human bodies below. The prisoners leave the cave. It is one of the poem's clearest victories of intelligence over physical power. Odysseus observes, plans, and solves a sequence of connected problems. Then, from the apparent safety of the ship, he begins to undo his success. He calls back toward the shore. His companions urge him to stop. The blind giant can still throw stones, and the sea has not yet placed them beyond danger. Odysseus continues. He reveals his real name. The announcement restores the heroic identity hidden behind nobody. Odysseus wants Polyphemus to know which man defeated him. He wants the story to carry the correct name. But identity creates a target. Polyphemus is the son of Poseidon. Once he knows his attacker's name, family, and homeland, he can direct a curse toward a specific person. Odysseus' need for recognition carries the danger beyond the cave. The episode is therefore not a simple contest between a clever hero and a foolish monster. Polyphemus is a violent host who rejects law and consumes guests. But Odysseus also enters the cave against the judgment of his companions, remains because he expects a reward, and later sacrifices safety for reputation. His intelligence creates the escape. His pride extends the suffering. The fear behind Polyphemus is the fear of entering a place where shared rules have no force. A stranger's rights exist only when someone agrees to recognize them. In the cave, custom cannot restrain private power. Polyphemus does not misunderstand hospitality. He refuses it. That is more frightening than the single eye. He is isolated, unaccountable, and strong enough to define reality inside his own domain. Polyphemus ranks above the Sirens because he combines captivity, cannibalism, failed law, and the hero's own destructive pride. Yet he can still be deceived. His body can be injured, his assumptions can be manipulated, his control of the cave can be broken. Odysseus escapes with fewer men, but he escapes. Another realm offers no such victory. Its inhabitants cannot be killed because they are already dead. And there, the greatest heroes of the past reveal what fame is worth after the body has disappeared. Number 3. The Underworld. Before Odysseus can complete his return, he is told to seek knowledge from the dead. The command carries his ship toward a boundary, outside ordinary human travel. There, he performs a ritual that allows the shades to approach. They gather around blood. Odysseus guards it with his sword until the figure he needs can speak. The prophet Tiresias gives him information about the path ahead. He warns Odysseus about the cattle belonging to Helios and describes the suffering that may follow if the crew violates the prohibition. Once again, knowledge arrives before disaster. Once again, knowledge will not be enough to prevent it. But prophecy is only one part of the encounter. Among the first dead Odysseus recognizes is Elpenor, one of his own companions. Elpenor did not die heroically. After drinking, he fell from Circe's roof and broke his neck. During the hurried departure, his body was left behind without burial. His appearance exposes a failure. Odysseus has traveled to seek information about his own survival, while one of the men under his command has not received the basic rights owed to the dead. Elpenor asks to be remembered and buried. The request shows that leadership obligations do not end when a crew member is no longer useful to the journey. Then Odysseus sees his mother. She was alive when he left for Troy. Now she is among the shades. He had not known that she was dead. The lost years suddenly acquire a cost no successful homecoming can repair. Odysseus may still reach Ithaca, but he will not arrive in time to find everyone he once hoped to see. He tries to embrace her. His arms pass through the shade. He tries again. Nothing changes. The repeated failure turns death from an abstract idea into a physical absence. Odysseus can see his mother. He can hear her. He cannot touch her. There is no hidden mechanism to exploit. No wordplay will restore the body. The dead have lost the physical form through which human relationships are expressed. They cannot embrace. They cannot act. They cannot return. They can only be remembered. The encounter with Achilles deepens the challenge. Achilles had achieved the form of success most closely associated with heroic culture. He was the greatest warrior at Troy. His fame would outlive his body. Odysseus assumes that such glory might provide comfort in death. Achilles rejects the idea. He would rather occupy a low position among the living than rule over the dead. The statement reverses the values normally attached to heroic achievement. Glory can survive death. The dead person cannot experience it as life. Reputation cannot restore warmth, movement, or choice. It cannot allow a warrior to hold his child or stand beneath the sun. The underworld does not suggest that remembrance is meaningless. Elpenor needs burial. Achilles remains concerned about his son. But the episode separates being remembered from being alive. They are not equal. For Odysseus, the journey home now means something different. It is no longer simply the final achievement of a successful warrior. It is an opportunity that exists only while he still has a living body. Every delay matters. Every death within the crew is not merely a reduction in manpower. It is the permanent removal of a human future. The underworld also forces Odysseus to confront the cost of absence. While he fought and traveled abroad, people at home continued to age. Some died. The world he intended to return to did not remain still. That fear remains recognizable. A person can survive war, travel, or ambition, only to discover that the life waiting at home has changed beyond repair. A homecoming may succeed and still come too late. The underworld ranks above Polyphemus because it cannot be defeated. Death is not an opponent with a weakness. Odysseus can leave only because he has not yet become one of its permanent inhabitants. He returns to the world of the living with a sharper understanding of what each life means. Soon, that understanding will make his next decision almost unbearable. He must steer through a passage where saving everyone is no longer possible. Number 2. Scylla. Circe explains the danger before Odysseus enters the strait. On one side lies Charybdis, a force capable of swallowing an entire vessel. On the other waits Scylla. If the ship passes within her reach, 6 heads will seize 6 sailors. Odysseus asks whether she can be fought. The answer offers little hope. Remaining to battle Scylla may expose the vessel to further attack. Courage cannot create safe water where none exists. The calculation is brutal. 6 men near Scylla, or perhaps everyone near Charybdis. This is no longer a problem with a victorious solution. It is a decision about loss. Odysseus knows what is likely to happen. His crew does not receive the same information. The poem does not present a modern debate about consent, but the tension is clear. If the sailors learn that 6 of them may be taken, panic could destroy the coordinated rowing needed to escape. If they are not told, they enter the danger without understanding the choice being made on their behalf. Odysseus chooses control. As the ship approaches, the men see the violence of Charybdis. Water turns and drops toward the darkness below. Odysseus moves closer to Scylla's side. He puts on his armor. The gesture reveals how difficult helplessness is for him to accept. Even after being warned that weapons will not solve the problem, he prepares to behave like a warrior. Then Scylla strikes. 6 sailors are lifted from the deck. The scene is not described as a distant strategic loss. The men remain conscious. They reach toward Odysseus and call his name. That detail prevents the deaths from becoming numbers. They do not call to an abstract commander. They call to the man who selected the route. For the survivors, 6 deaths may be the price of escaping Charybdis. For each victim, there is no shared survival. The majority continues toward home. The 6 do not. Odysseus remembers the sight as one of the most painful moments of the voyage. The horror comes not only from what Scylla does, but from his proximity to it. He sees the men. He hears his name. He has no action available that will bring them back. Scylla represents the fear of unavoidable sacrifice. Leaders in war, disaster, medicine, and survival can face decisions in which every option causes harm. The existence of a less destructive choice does not transform it into a good outcome. Numbers can describe the calculation. They cannot contain the experience of the individuals selected by it. The episode leaves questions. The poem does not answer simply. Should Odysseus have warned the crew? Would complete knowledge have changed the result? Is a leader responsible for deaths produced by the only route that saves the majority? Necessity and responsibility can exist together. A decision may be rational and still leave guilt behind. This is why Scylla occupies number 2. The Lotus Eaters can be dragged away. Circe can restore her victims. The Sirens can be blocked. Polyphemus can be deceived. Scylla offers no complete solution. Odysseus's intelligence has reached its limit. It no longer produces victory. It identifies the least catastrophic loss available. The ship continues because 6 places on the deck are now empty. Yet even Scylla has a limit. She takes 6 and allows the vessel to pass. Across the strait is the force that makes this sacrifice appear necessary. Charybdis does not demand 6 lives. It may erase everyone. Number 1. Charybdis. The sea begins to empty. Water that supported the ship moments earlier now moves toward a rotating center. Foam and debris descend together as the surface drops toward the darkness below. Then the water returns. Charybdis is often imagined as a gigantic mouth. The terror of the episode does not require a visible face. It behaves more like a process. The sea moves inward and outward according to a cycle. Charybdis does not pursue Odysseus because of hatred. It does not recognize the names of the sailors. It cannot be flattered, intoxicated, or deceived. It simply continues. That indifference separates it from every earlier danger. Calypso wants Odysseus. Circe can change her position. The Sirens understand desire. Polyphemus can be provoked and manipulated. Scylla behaves like a predator, taking individual prey. Charybdis has no relationship with the people it may destroy. Ancient sailors knew that some waters demanded close attention to current, coastline, and timing. Narrow passages can accelerate water. Submerged rocks can produce turbulence. Whirlpools and violent currents can form under particular conditions. The Strait of Messina, between Sicily and the Italian mainland, has long been associated with Scylla and Charybdis. Its complex currents help explain why the comparison remains attractive. But the geography of the poem does not match any modern route perfectly. There is no evidence that allows every stage of Odysseus's voyage to be fixed confidently on a map. The safer interpretation is broader. The story preserves the logic of a real maritime fear, a narrow route, dangerous water, and a decision to remain closer to one side because the other threatens complete destruction. Myth enlarges the current until it can swallow an entire world. During the first passage, Charybdis does not take the ship, but it controls the decision. Odysseus moves towards Scylla because the alternative appears capable of killing everyone. 6 men die under the shadow of the greater danger. Charybdis therefore causes loss even without touching them. Later, Odysseus encounters the force again under entirely different conditions. The crew has killed the cattle of Helios. The ship has been destroyed and every companion is gone. Odysseus drifts alone on wreckage. He no longer commands a fleet. He has no sailors to organize, no intact hull, and no mast to which he can be tied. The political and military identity that carried him through earlier dangers has been stripped away. One human body approaches Charybdis. As the water begins to pull downward, Odysseus catches hold of a fig tree growing above the dangerous area. He hangs there. There is no attack to launch, no speech to deliver, no command to give. He cannot order the sea to release the wreckage. He can only watch the cycle and endure. Below him, the remains of the vessel disappear. Odysseus waits for them to return. The moment has little of the conventional warrior about it. Survival depends on patience, physical endurance, and the ability to move when the opportunity finally appears. The timbers rise again. Odysseus releases his grip, falls into the water, and reaches them. He escapes, but he has not defeated Charybdis. The force remains exactly what it was. Its cycle continues. Odysseus survives because he finds a temporary position beyond its reach and acts during the brief moment when escape becomes possible. He does not conquer nature. He passes through an interval in which nature allows him to live. This is the fear behind Charybdis. Total erasure by an indifferent world. A storm or current does not need hatred to destroy a family. A ship can vanish without a burial place, without testimony, and without an enemy who can be punished. For communities dependent on the sea, disappearance carried a particular horror. The dead might never be recovered. Their final moments might never be known. A household could remain trapped between grief and uncertainty. Charybdis gives that fear a single form. The sea opens. Everything falls through. Then the surface closes. The threat goes beyond death. It includes the destruction of evidence that the journey ever existed. Scylla leaves survivors who can remember the 6. Charybdis may leave no one. That is why it ranks number 1. It is not the most intelligent or psychologically manipulative monster. It has no personality to study. It is the most complete threat. It can destroy the body, the ship, the crew, the story, and the possibility of homecoming in the same moment. There is no bargain that will reduce its appetite, because appetite may not be the right word. Charybdis does not want to erase Odysseus. It represents a world capable of erasing him without wanting anything at all. The monsters in the Odyssey take radically different forms. Some are violent from the beginning. Others are beautiful. Some speak directly to Odysseus. Others never recognize that he exists. Yet every one of them attacks the same objective: homecoming. The Lotus Eaters remove the desire to return. Calypso offers to replace home with perfect captivity. Circe takes away recognizable human form. The cattle of Helios reveal how hunger can destroy the discipline required to continue. The Laestrygonians eliminate the fleet. The Sirens trap Odysseus inside knowledge, memory, and fascination with his own past. Polyphemus places travelers beyond the protection of law. The underworld reveals that return can come too late. Scylla makes survival depend upon sacrifice. Charybdis threatens to erase the journey completely. Another pattern runs through these encounters: eating. Sailors consume the lotus and lose themselves. Polyphemus consumes his guests. The Laestrygonians treat sailors like captured fish. Circe transforms humans into animals associated with appetite. The crew kills sacred cattle because hunger has overwhelmed restraint. Scylla takes human prey from the deck. Charybdis consumes the ship itself. The poem repeatedly changes the human position within the food chain. At one moment, the traveler is a guest expecting to be fed. At another, he becomes the meal. This instability points toward a larger question about civilization. Law, ritual, and hospitality create spaces in which people can meet without immediately treating one another as threats or resources. When those structures disappear, the categories collapse. The guest becomes an animal. The host becomes a predator. Food becomes forbidden. Survival becomes guilt. The journey also tracks the changing power of intelligence. Early on, Odysseus can act decisively. He drags men away from the lotus. He resists Circe's drug. He designs restraints against the Sirens. He deceives Polyphemus with a false name. These are victories of planning over danger. But intelligence does not expand without limit. Tiresias can explain the future, yet the crew still kills the cattle. Knowledge of Scylla cannot save all 6 men. Understanding Charybdis does not control the water. Near the end of the journey, intelligence becomes something quieter. It is the ability to distinguish a disastrous option from a fatal one. It is the discipline to continue after loss. It is the patience to hold on until the wreckage returns. The monsters themselves become progressively less open to negotiation. Calypso speaks. Circe changes her position. The Sirens understand desire. Polyphemus can be manipulated through language. Scylla behaves as a predator. Charybdis does not communicate at all. The closer the ranking moves toward number 1, the less the danger resembles a social opponent. Human rules and appeals gradually lose their power. The final force cannot hear arguments about hospitality, courage, or justice. None of this proves that giant cannibals or 6-headed creatures once occupied Mediterranean islands. The Odyssey is a work of myth and poetry, not a record of verified zoological encounters. But the fears carried by its monsters did not require belief in the supernatural. Ancient sailors could lose their route, abandon ships, starve, enter hostile ports, encounter lawless violence, or disappear in dangerous water. Commanders could make decisions that saved some people and condemned others. Families could wait for travelers who never returned. Myth did not invent those experiences. It gave them bodies. The Cyclops made lawless power visible. Circe made the loss of agency visible. The Sirens made dangerous desire audible. Charybdis gave disappearance a shape. That may be why these creatures have survived for so long. Their physical forms belong to an ancient poetic world. The pressures they represent remain familiar. People still confuse comfort with freedom. Groups still break rules under scarcity. Knowledge still fails to control desire. Leaders still choose between harmful outcomes. Nature still destroys without intention. The monsters were imaginary forms built around dangers. Ancient audiences did not need to imagine. Odysseus eventually reaches Ithaca. But the man who returns is not the commander who left Troy with a fleet. His ships are gone. His companions are dead. His mother has passed into the underworld. The sea has taken years that no homecoming can restore. Survival in the Odyssey is not complete victory. It is remembering home when forgetting would be easier. It is choosing mortal relationships over perfect isolation. It is understanding when intelligence can solve a danger and when it can only help a person endure one. The monsters belong to myth. But the fear of losing freedom, identity, law, companions, and every trace of one's journey was real. Perhaps that is why they never disappeared. Not because we believe they are still waiting beyond an unexplored island, but because the fears that gave them life are still traveling with us.